No more insight into the future than anybody else. I do think what is happening over time is that people, the influence that the internet has had on entertainment is mostly that audiences have come to expect things like everything else in their life. When they want it, where they want it, how they want it, more control over it. Yeah, and I do think that this idea of walking into a movie theater and surrendering for 2 hours, as much as that is a romantic thing that I love to do as well, most people in the audience now are watching movies for the first time at home. And when they're doing that, the dynamic is very, very different. You know, so you see a movie in the theater and it's much, much bigger than you. Now you're about 5'7", 5'10", 5'11". The movie's 60 feet tall sometimes. And it starts exactly what time it says it's going to start, and you better be in your seat or you're going to miss it. And you don't touch your phone and you don't talk to anybody. All those
get that popcorn really fast.
Oh, definitely, and all those things are really wonderful. But the way the audiences are experiencing movies now, for the first time, sometimes they're at home and they're more comfortable, but they're a little more distracted. And more importantly, they have at the click of a button, they can watch anything ever made, and yet they've chosen to watch your movie. And so that the audience, what we owe the audience is to move good on that choice, so that they don't push that button and watch something different. And it isn't, by the way, you don't have to trick them, you don't have to make it explosive and all that. It just has to be more compelling. So I think movies at home have to be more compelling than movies in theaters, because the audience is a little more distracted all the time. And that's not a bad thing. Throughout history, we always have to kind of meet the audience where they are, and increasingly that's where the audience is. So I think leaning into that instead of fighting it would be a helpful thing, and understand that we're all in service to the audience wherever they're watching, on whatever screen they're watching. We have to please the audience always.
That's a lot of food for thought, and I would love to get a filmmaker's perspective on it, but we keep that for a later date. Sanjay, back to you. Your films have always touched on a very crucial. They always have a larger-than-life backdrop. They touch on important aspects of history, and yet your stories are very character-focused and very human story-focused. What is your process? How do you go about, and I'm not asking you about your process, but how do you go about researching these wonderful worlds that you create? I mean, some of them are just so unbelievable. I mean,
historical, you need to be very careful. So yes, you need to get your facts right, and that is where my research ends, because most of it is imagination, most of it is how I see the period. I do go and see the architecture. When I go there, then I start thinking my own extra pillars and own extra roofs and own extra carpets. So it's done, but it's not really so detailed as a research, because I find research very boring. I, as a filmmaker, am not set out to make a documentary that I want it to be exact. I want my impressions, childlike impressions, grown-up impressions, heartbroken lovers' impressions. I want all that to come into the film rather than just documenting and research. So I start with making a song. When the song falls in place, and I imagine the whole song unfold. Music is a very important part of my films. A lot of people feel that every film doesn't have to have music. It's right. I mean, there are very important socially relevant films that are made. You don't need music, but I need music. I've grown up listening to music, and that's it. So if anything I need to go to inspiration for is music. So music starts, that's my research. Imagination of how that music would happen, of how this woman would look, how will she talk, what is the dialogue, is the dialogue inspiring me, are the dramatic scenes inspiring me? I feel bored about people who say, we did a lot of research and we did it. It's my take on it. And they are right in the way they do it, that's how it should be done. But I feel I just start taking off, I just start
all those nuances you bring to your stories and contextualize those nuances actually are all out of your imagination.
Yeah, because if it's there, then people have seen it, people have seen it in a documentary or in a series or something. This is what they've not seen. So what is Devdas like? Obviously he's a literature character. But what is Bajiram Mastani like? They have not seen Bajiram Mastani. So I can take all the liberty to do what because none of them have seen him actually, because he's 300, 400 years old. So what do I give them that makes them feel that they're seeing a film that we connect to today? This audience, as you say, has changed. 50 years ago, it would have been a different film if I'd made Bhansali or Gangubai. So there is a certain modern approach to the way you make a film. The audience has to connect to it. They have to relate to this historical or a period piece. But even Gangubai, I think it was a film set in the 40s and 50s with a very particular nature. There wasn't something that I went into the exact, because I've lived in the brothels, next to the brothels for 30 years of my life, one lane away from the brothels. So I knew in and out what those lanes looked like, smelled like, what are the faces like. So I had my research, I think, and then the rest was imagination. You can't keep going and trying to copy things and make notes. Making notes bored me completely. I'm sorry I sound like a person who film students should not listen to. Adhere to my style of filmmaking, guys.
And I bet your version of 300 years ago is way more interesting than it really was 300 years ago.
Yeah, that was where I was leading. He's our most treasured, creative mind in our country. He's the one with the creative vision. His storytelling is always something we don't expect. It's spectacular. I want to know what you think is Sanjay's unique brand of storytelling, and what's the magic that you see in his art sitting there in LA?
No,
besides his driver calling him.
I think I've said some of them, but I think it's that the range of the work. I mean, for me, when I think of your career, thinking about silence, thinking about black, thinking about Gungabai, thinking about this and the difference, they're wildly different. Storytelling, it's wildly different worlds that you're building out, and this ability to strike that right balance between style and drama and substance and how you move a story. I think it's very, very, very unique, and what the images you put on screen and the way that they move you emotionally. Sometimes it's a tiny step in the dance, or sometimes it's in the line of dialogue. It's subtle and it's unbelievably impactful. For as much work that goes into it, you seem to invest a lot in little movements of emotion. The thing that takes you from being a little bit sad to very sad, or a little bit excited to very excited. It's a beautiful, beautiful art form. So I think that's the thing, and that comes from all the attention to detail we talked about earlier.
And from a Netflix point of view, what can we expect from Hira Mandi? I'm saying, what can we expect from Hira Mandi from a Netflix perspective, from your perspective?
Look, I think that the version, to be the clearest, cleanest version of what it is. I mean, the purest, and in every bit the purest sense, and that the fact that we can offer this for real audiences in India, and for many people, it'll be the first time they see anything like this in the world, and the excitement around it that we provide is thrilling.
I'm going to ask you to give us a sort of a deeper insight into the world that you're creating. But before that, Ted, I want to ask you a last question before we kind of open the floor to a lot of people here who want to ask you so many questions. So you deal with world-class storytellers, okay, people who are almost iconic in the kind of work they make. But at the same time, how do you find the balance between being a hands-on person and at the same time giving the artist his creative freedom, and what is the right balance? Because you are at the end of the day making stories that transcend boundaries.
Yeah, I think the real art of what we do, Monica here, who heads up all of our content in India, shares the same view, this idea that basically our role really is to hopefully pick the projects and pick the storytellers and then give them the tools to do the best work of their life. And if we picked well, on both of those fronts, that's really where our art begins and ends. So mostly we're here to empower, we're here to help, because I do think if we choose correctly, the storytellers want to connect with the audience and they do want help. But I think it's very important that our creative executives are invited into the process, because they think we bring something to the process that's helpful, not just something that says, I like this and you like that. So I think that's been the thing. At the very beginning of Netflix original programming, I didn't have any staff, so we had great creative freedom because I had no choice. I had no one to do it. But then we found that it was really helpful in that I think what artists often were frustrated by overbearing network and studio notes and overbearing creativity, really because and for me I said, let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's see how much value we can bring to the creator. And that's really been that's really been the cornerstone.
That's a dream association. And Sanjay, we've always noticed that in all your films you have pretty iconic and strong female characters, and stories are very often from their point of view. And Hiramandi seems to be, from their perspective. So you just talked about how the courtesans lived. We didn't know how they lived, but we would love to know more about your perception of how they did, and tell us a little bit, take us into a little bit of a deep dive into their lives.
Don't you think you should wait for a few months to see
No,
actually
can't wait.
This point, I cannot
We're
explain.
just bullying you into
They're
telling us a
such
little.
beautiful women. I feel that every woman in her life, every woman is a queen. She should be treated like a queen. My mother was a queen, your mother is a queen, you are a queen, she is a queen, every woman is a queen. And these were courtesans who, behind their veils, were real women. They felt so much pain. There was so much that they went through, and yet they would come in the evening and sing and dance. Now look at those lives. The courtesans, they do not have a very place in society. The society goes to them. They please those men, they entertain those men, and they go back to their dark world. And once the prime time is over, the courtesan is laid over, she's forgotten. So how are you going to, what about those jewelry that they wear and the makeup they wear and try and disguise and camouflage all the anguish that they feel? This is what is being told through the series, and these wonderful women have performed so beautifully. They're such nuanced performances. Manisha and me did the first film together called Khamoshi, which was about...
General Manisha Koirala that's silence film. She was first one?
Yeah, so right from my first film, Vishnu played a strong character. She played a daughter to hearing impaired parents who didn't want to let her go. Similar theme in Koda also. But that was 25 years ago. To Nandini, to Parvati, to Rani's character in black, they were all strong women. I feel all directors that I have loved, Raj Kapoor, Yash Chopra, K. Asif Saab, Mehboob Khan Saab, Bimal Roy Saab, Guru Dutt Saab, they were all who told beautiful women's stories. They understood that she is the creator of man, and therefore she needs to be given a place in literature, in cinema, in art, in every which way. So these were the great filmmakers, V. Shantaram. They always told stories of women. They were not telling necessarily stories of men. So if there's a Bajirao, there's a Mastani also for me. So as long as there is no Mastani, I would not make Bajirao. So as long as there is no Padmavat who holds fort and fights that war and goes into fire, I would have not made that. So here is now, and 7 women, 8 women who are inspiring me to say, Push, this is how you fight suffering. This is how you fight to stand for dignity. This is what dignity means to even a courtesan, even to a sex worker. Dignity is very important. That was the theme of Gangubai. So I've always granted learning from these great filmmakers and all great literature also. It's celebrating a woman, celebrating, that is, I think, the most difficult part for a filmmaker to be able to execute it. It's easy to say it. But, and when you have beautiful women and beautiful actors like that, I'm launching Sharmin into it, and she's also playing a very important part. So all these women, when they come around and perform, then they're telling something that you want to say. It's difficult. It's new, and so I hope all that I'm bragging about right now actually reaches people and it converts onto the screen, because you're always insecure about it. A filmmaker is always insecure. That drives him to do his best, do his work harder, because will I get this right? I got Gangubai right. Now will I get Hiramandi right? So I work harder. So what hard amount of hours I've worked in Khamoshi to the number of hours I've worked in Hiramandi is tenfold more. Because I want to keep giving the audience, who I love immensely, my best and more and more and more. Till the day they tell me to shut up and sit down. I say, we have enough of you. But I feel that Hiramandi has got those nuances which you will find in the great Kamalam Ruiz Pakistan. Hiramandi is also my tribute to the OTT platform of those great Mughal-e-Azam, like the great Pakistan, the great films that we made in India, Mehboob Khan Saab's Mother India. Hiramandi will actually be that tribute to them. So.
Cheers to that. All I can say, ladies, in the country for president. Really. Yeah, nobody thinks about us. This is great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay, so here, I'm going to I have 5 or 4 rapid fire questions. Are you game? And 4 quick rapid fire questions. Okay, let's just test you won't have to use your imagination for this. So that's it. You can give it a break. All right. For you, your stories. Okay, let me tell you this. Let me ask you first then. Okay. So you create stories that have inspired many. What inspires you? One word answer. One.
Creation.
Okay.
So it's something from nothing, something spectacular from your mind to the screen. It's amazing.
What is the last thing that you watched or read that you loved and felt moved by?
I'm going to give you 2. Netflix picked up a film at Sundance this year called Fair Play. Earlier when I was talking about the art of storytelling and the new way of consuming, this is a movie that basically sets a hook with the audience in the first 5 minutes. The first 5 pages of the script took you on a ride with this couple that you're going to spend the next 2 hours with. That in the first 5 minutes you said, I am all in with these 2. I cannot wait to see what happens to them. So that was really incredible. And a topic that has not been really addressed in film, so I'm really excited about that. That's a little ways off. And then on Netflix, this is not just a plug, I really was incredibly moved by our documentary, Romantics. I spent so much time and energy really trying to understand the history of and the connection of Indian cinema and the Indian culture, and it really connected the dots for me in a way that I never had experienced before. And to understand, I got this understanding. If you think about everything that we do in our programming in India, just think about it. Even recently with things like Class that's on right now. I know there's a couple of Class.
Yes, that's what I'm watching.
Major Manjnu, and the range of what's being out there. And the way that it was described which seemed so perfect, which is, it's like thali is the word, right? Their food. A little bit of it, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And you see that in many cultures, a movie has to be a drama, or a horror movie, or a love story, or a musical. And in India, they could be all those things at the same time. And it's so cool. And it also reminded me, which was maybe my first introduction to India cinema was Duff. And that movie for me, I didn't know how important it was to the culture until I saw this documentary we did. I thought for me it was, I grew up in the early days with the home video stores where you rent VHS tapes, and every video store had a copy of Duff. I didn't know why, so probably some distribution deal somebody made. So where I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, if you saw an Indian movie, it was probably Duff. So anyway, our documentary Romantics inspired me dramatically.
Amazing. And note to myself, never ask Ted Sarandos a one-word question.
Sorry. Oh, was it one? Pick any one of those words. You can pick any one of those words.
All right. Okay, Sanjay, I'm going to ask you the same question. What is the last thing you saw or read that inspired you or you loved?
What I read, I'm not telling because somebody will go and look at the series
No.
What I saw last was, I think for the last 1 month I've been watching Hiramandi's episodes on the editing table. So I'm only watching that. No, seriously, I watched a film called The Banshees of Inisherin, which I was very moved by. I thought it was spectacular. And that films like that can be made today when we talk about box office in billions and trillions. And then there is a pure film like that which comes and just touches you with a more simple film.
What is the best compliment you've received?
On this outfit earlier today from.
Yes, that's right. And you, Sanjay. Come on, give it to us. We need to see a side of you that nobody. We need to see your work.
No compliment. I still haven't received that compliment which I would like to receive or hear or feel good. So I'll wait for it.
But the world's compliments and you haven't liked any?
I'll wait for that right one.
All right. Okay, we'll ask you for the next series.
As you know, okay, now I can retire. I mean, that after that.
No pressure.
No.
Okay, this is an interesting one. This is for you, Ted, and only you. What project do you regret having passed on?
All the ones that worked.
Good one. All right. Fair, you gotta be honest. And Sanjay, this one is only for you. If you got the opportunity to remake a classic, which one would you go for?
I think Mother India, which I would refuse to make because you can't touch that film. No filmmaker should make it, but that's one film that I would like to remake, but I will refrain from making it.
Fair enough. Well said. That's all that I have. I have many, many more questions, but I'm going to leave the floor open to a lot of you out here who have questions.